And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Okay, the low that came up across Prince William Sound earlier today and will pull by late tonight into Norton Sound. And so there'll be a kind of widespread area of light snow here over the western part of the state. Blizzard warning continues to the Arctic coast for winds gusting to 75 miles per hour. Dry with virtually very light winds over the central and eastern part of the state. Still a chance of moisture here for the North Gulf Coast. Next system spreading more wind and rain in toward the Panhandle, especially on the south coast. And then for tomorrow, this low slides southward, continues to slowly weaken, but good northerly winds here on the backside of this pull colder air down across the eastern Aleutians Alaska Peninsula area with numerous rain and snow showers perlofts all the way up into the Chukchi Sea, improving wind-wise on the Arctic coast up there in the North Slope, but still areas of light snow, flurries and fog. Dry over the interior here, chance of snow showers, Kenai Peninsula up into the Talkeetnas, Manuska Valley, chance of rain on the North Gulf Coast, periods of rain for the southeast coast. And then for Saturday, that low stays parked off the north coast there, so that's going to keep it unsettled and damp there for the Panhandle through Saturday. Drier with some clearing here, south central Alaska, colder temperatures, all areas, but staying above zero everywhere, all the way up to the North Slope. Still some flurries and fog, but much lighter winds on the Arctic coast now. As next system out here to the west won't really be a factor until probably late in the weekend or first of next week up here over the northwest part of the state. Otherwise, for the south coast, gale warnings tomorrow with that next front approaching the Panhandle there. South winds 35 to 40 knots. Central coast, southeast winds 40 knots, and for the north coast, east-southeast, 30 to 40 knots. Gale warnings for Prince of Wales, or for, gale warnings for Clarence Strait. Southeast winds 35 knots with higher gusts, southeast 25 for Clarence Strait with higher gusts, and southeast to 20 with higher gusts for Lynn Canal. And then for Saturday, inside waters, northern central areas, lighter winds, southeast of 15 knots, seas 3 feet. Clarence Strait, south winds at 20 knots with 8-foot seas. South coast looking at southwest winds at 20 knots, south to southeast winds on the central coast at 20 knots, and pretty light east to northeast breezes at 15 for the north coast. For Kamishak Bay tomorrow, northwest winds at 25 knots, same forecast for the Barren Islands. Cook Inlet, north to northeast winds 10 to 15 knots, 2 to 3 foot seas. Prince William Sound, east winds 20 knots, seas 4 feet. North at 20 for the western North Gulf Coast. East-northeast, 30 to 35 knots for the eastern North Gulf Coast. And for the day Saturday, first day of the weekend, 20 to 30 knot winds, eastern North Gulf Coast from the north and northeast. North at 15, Prince William Sound, north 25, western North Gulf Coast. And for northern Cook Inlet, northwest at 15 knots, seas 3 feet. Southern Cook Inlet, northwest 25 knots. Stronger west to northwest winds, good gales, 40-knot gales there for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands, the seas around 10 feet. And for the Alaska Peninsula tomorrow, west winds 25 to 30 knots. Bristol Bay, west winds 25 knots. Kodiak Island, northwest winds 20 to 25 knots. And then for Saturday, Kodiak Island, west-northwest winds 30 to 35 knots. And gale warnings for the Alaska Peninsula, northwest winds 35 to 40 knots, northwest at 30 knots for Bristol Bay with 12-foot seas. Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, gale warnings, west winds 35 knots. Adak and Atka, gale warnings, west winds 35 to 40 knots, and west winds 30 to 35 knots for the western Aleutians. And then for Saturday, gale warnings, Kiska Island to Shimia, especially towards Shimia and Attu. South to southwest winds increasing 40 to 45 knots. Otherwise, Adak and Atka, southwest at 25. And on Alaska Island, gale warnings, west winds 40 knots, seas 9 to 17 feet. For the southwest coast here tomorrow, northwest winds for the Yukon Delta coast at 20 knots, west 20 for the Kuskokwim Delta coast, north at 15, St. Lawrence Island. Much stronger winds here, St. Matthew Island and the Pribilofs, northwest at 40 knots with 15 to 17 foot seas. And then for Saturday, small craft advisories for the southwest coast, northwest winds 25 to 30 knots, west at 30 for the Pribilofs, southwest 30, St. Matthew Island, Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, northwest 15 to 20 knots. And up along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, good gales continue tomorrow, but not as strong as today. East winds 40 knots, 8 to 10 foot seas in the ice-free waters. Northeast 40 on the central coast. Gale warnings all the way down to Point Hope out of the northeast at 35 knots. And then for Saturday, much lighter winds now. Still a little brisk here on the central and eastern Arctic coast. East-northeast 25 knots. Northeast at 20 for the western coast. Chukchi Sea, north to northeast winds at 15 to 20 knots.